This is the Dollemore Daily.
Hi, I'm Mike Greiner from the Democratic Activist Channel, sitting in for Jesse while he completes his move from California to D.C. We're all hoping that Jesse will be back soon, and my understanding is that he will be back at the beginning of next week. But in the meantime, the news never stops, so let's talk politics. And a big story today is the fact that the Justice Department has gone forward with seditious conspiracy charges against the leader of the Oath Keepers. Stuart Rhodes is a former Army paratrooper who went to law school at Yale and has been a leader of the Oath Keepers since 2009 when he announced the creation of this group at a right-wing rally in Lexington, Massachusetts, the site of the famous Revolutionary War battle. Rhodes, of course, was part of the far right that came to prominence during the Obama administration in reaction basically to a black man being elected president of the United States. That included groups such as the Tea Party. The Oath Keepers, though, has been different in that they are an unapologetically violent group, many with military experience. And in fact, the indictment against Rhodes and against 9 other Oath Keepers details a near military mission where a squad moved into the Capitol with military precision with the goal of capturing Nancy Pelosi. At the same time, another squad was stationed in a hotel in Virginia, ready to go into D.C. to assist as needed. Now, what's especially significant about this indictment is following the speech by Merrick Garland the other day, where he detailed the fact that he was starting the prosecutions with people directly involved in the insurrection and that he'd be moving up from there. Rhodes, unlike everybody else who's been charged so far, actually did not go into the Capitol. Instead, he's charged with seditious conspiracy for essentially fomenting revolution against the United States of America, which is exactly what he was doing. Now, Rhodes, for his part, denies that that was ever the intent of the Oath Keepers, and instead they were simply there to protect certain Trump officials. However, at least 4 Oath Keepers have reportedly turned state's evidence against Rhodes and are testifying as to the direction that they received from him to go in and invade the Capitol. But perhaps the most damning evidence comes from the encrypted app Signal, where messages have been discovered by investigators in which Rhodes specifically urges on the Capitol invaders, and in fact in which he engaged in a process of planning leading up to the insurrection, writing things like, "We aren't getting through this without a civil war. Too late for that. Prepare your mind, body, spirit." And in a separate message, "It will be a bloody and desperate fight. We're going to have to fight that can't be avoided." Now, seditious conspiracy, frankly, is a charge that isn't leveled very often, and even when it is, it's hard to prove. The last time somebody was charged with it was back in 2010, when members of the Michigan militia were charged with plotting a violent coup. They were ultimately acquitted of those charges, showing just how difficult they are to prove. Indeed, the idea of sedition likely goes back to the 1790s, when the early United States passed the Alien and Sedition Acts, laws that were used by the Adams administration to essentially tamp down on any kind of criticism, doing everything up to and including jailing journalists who disagreed with them. Ultimately, the Adams administration was defeated by Thomas Jefferson, largely as a result of the reign of terror that existed in the United States as a result of these acts. Since then, sedition is rarely used, although we did see it arise again during World War I. But its most common usage after the Alien and Seditions Act was repealed in 1802 was by the slave-holding South that used it to try to keep black people from asserting their rights. And then subsequent to that, when Jim Crow came into effect, it was used essentially to terrorize black people and to keep them in their place, essentially keep them in a position of slavery even after they had been freed. Nevertheless, in recent years, it's been rarely used, given this questionable history, but it appears that now it may be making an appropriate comeback. The problem is, what do you charge the leaders of the insurrection with? I mean, they actually didn't go into the Capitol. They were not involved in the direct attack. So obviously they were involved in some kind of conspiracy, but what conspiracy to do what? Well, that's where seditious conspiracy comes into effect. Treason, which is defined in the Constitution, is extremely hard to prove and requires overt acts against the United States. Seditious conspiracy, on the other hand, can simply be a conspiracy to engage in some type of warlike action against the United States. Things that clearly were the intent based upon the evidence that we've seen by Mr. Rhodes. Now, you know that his defense is going to be First Amendment. just as the defense of many of these protesters who engaged in the insurrection was First Amendment. Yes, you have a right to protest, but you do not have a right to trespass into the Capitol building and threaten the lives of individuals who are trying to do their job in administering the government. And ultimately, in many cases, injuring and even killing people. Those actions are not protected by the First Amendment. And to the extent that Rhodes and his Oath Keepers were involved in those activities, they constitute seditious conspiracy. Now, we'll see how these charges develop over time, but we should remember that Attorney General Merrick Garland essentially earned his stripes as a federal prosecutor in charge of the prosecution against the Oklahoma City bombers. He may be careful, but it's worth noting that his prosecution of Tim McVeigh and Terry Nichols was victorious, and it stood up against numerous appeals. Reason being that he was well prepared and thorough. My hope is that the same kind of care that we saw in the prosecution of the Oklahoma City bombers is the kind of care and attention to detail that we're going to see in this charge. And if that's the case, then I'd say that Rhodes and his Oath Keepers are in big trouble. In fact, they could face prison terms of up to 20 years. Well, if you have any comments or questions about this, please leave them down in the comments down below. And if you could check out my channel, Democratic Activist, I'll link to that down below as well. I'll see you in the next video. In the meantime, let's hope for continued progress. Thank you.